Hello, welcome to Newscentre. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Today we look at the progress of the government's PLI scheme so far. Data released by the government in September shows that investment and employment across most sectors is nowhere close to expectation. A report by rating agency ICRA says that capex deployment from the PLI scheme is expected to surge from FY24 for more than 80% of the projected investments. The report says bulk of the PLI capex that companies have to put in will be concentrated between FY24 and FY26 as most of the major sectors start manufacturing activities from FY24. To discuss this more, I'm now joined by Rohit Ahuja, Head of Research and Outreach at ICRA. Rohit, thank you very much for joining us. Let me begin by asking you, we have been seeing the PLI scheme encouraging investment, encouraging production in a few sectors, such as mobile phones, pharmaceuticals right now, maybe 3 to 4 sectors, but the investments have not really taken off as a result of other PLI schemes or other sectors. Why is that?
Hi, Parikshit. So I think one of the key factors here is that these schemes were announced a year back, and the bidding were going on as late as middle of this year. So when a bid is awarded and there is a lag of about 6 months to a year before on the ground capex picks up. Plus, we need to understand we are in the middle of massive supply chain disruptions, geopolitical uncertainties. So entrepreneurs and investors need to ensure that the project is profitable and takes off well in time, because most of the PLI scheme benefits are accruable only once the production starts. So it's in the incentive for the winning bidders to start the capex as early as possible and to get it right so that they can start getting the benefits. So we've heard, about
Right.
semiconductor PLI scheme. The land allocation happened recently, and now it is expected to pick up only in FY24. Similarly, ACC batteries, we saw the most of the bidders being announced about 2 months back, and as with any project, it takes about a few months before it kicks off. So that's the reason if you do the math,
Right.
we can clearly see that FY24 is the inflection point when the capex actually starts showing, purely because the bids were just announced recently and the land allocation and all the processes just started.
Okay. Rohit, also to ask you, ICRA is saying that capex deployment is expected to surge from FY24. Which are some of the sectors where we will see a surge in production, a surge in capital investment? And the reason why I'm asking you is because there has been concern in some government quarters about capital investment not really taking off to the level it should.
Yeah, so obviously the largest schemes being semiconductor and ACC batteries, and we've heard a lot of media coverage on who got awarded the schemes. We should see those lead the capex first in FY24. Then you have various other PLI scheme winners, where medical devices, textiles, solar PV modules, where already the capex is happening, but it will show on the ground primarily once large project starts contributing. So we already know semiconductor is the one which will have the biggest component of capex over the next 3 years, and that's where the big jump in capex should come in from next year.
Right. Also to ask you, what are some of the tweaks possibly that we need to the PLI schemes in order to boost manufacturing further, in order to make our exports more competitive?
I think currently the incentives that have been awarded in many of the schemes is very much attractive. What we have mentioned in our report is, there could be certain uncertainties in terms of supply chain, procurement of raw material for the plant and machinery. That's where I think the government needs to be dynamic. Currently, very difficult to envisage any specific tweak, but I think looking at the scenario, how things shape up over the next 3 to 4 months, probably the government may need to add a few more incentives, and it all depends on how the geopolitical environment is and how the global supply chain environment is, and it all a factor of the macro developments across the world. But as of now,
Right.
we don't see
Rohit, we
any
have been
major
hearing that,
tweaks.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't see any major tweaks. We've also been hearing that the government is considering at least 8 or 9 more sectors for PLI schemes. This includes vaccine, raw materials as well. Which are some of the sectors which could benefit from the PLI schemes which are in the pipeline?
So one of the large schemes that we are expecting is on electrolyzers for green hydrogen. I think that's been an ask for the industry because we've seen a big investments being envisaged in that space. Electrolyzers is a very critical component for manufacturing green hydrogen, and that's one of the last schemes that we expect to come in. Another one being power transmission equipment. As we all know, the renewables PLI has taken off significantly, but there is a massive investments required in power transmission. And many of the components that go into power transmission equipment, we are seeing a lot of imports there. So given the structure of the PLI scheme is to replace imports and make India more self-sufficient, I think this is one of the other sectors where we could see the scheme could be announced. Vaccine materials, definitely, we've seen the need for it over the last 2 to 3 years. But the urgency with regards to vaccines currently is kind of fading, given that the concerns on COVID has kind of mellowed down quite a bit. So that may not come off
Right.
immediately. Another one in the China plus one strategy, chemicals fit into that space. So we've heard some news on certain schemes in chemicals, especially the ones which are getting imported. The government could come up with a scheme on that.
Right. You have said in your report that the government PLI schemes to date have had encouraging bids across sectors. However, deployment of capex is expected to pick up only in FY24 for more than 80% of the projected investments. Now, in terms of how these investments will lead to job creation, any kind of estimates on the number of jobs that could be created across these sectors starting FY24 onwards?
Difficult to predict right now. See, overall, we expected more than 3 million jobs from the entire scheme. Now it's all a function of which sector picks up in a big way. But the scheme is a more long-term scheme. As we mentioned in the report, bulk of the capex starts deploying from next year. So we expect overall job creation of up to 3 to 4 million. And indirectly, there could be far more bigger job creation as other ancillary sectors and the supply chain come into play. But it is going to see a major effect. You will come to know only in next 1 to 2 years what sort of impact on the ground we have.
All right. So FY24 is when the real test of the PLI schemes and their performance on the ground will be seen by everyone. Thank you very much, Rohit, for joining us and giving us your analysis of the PLI schemes, their progress so far, and why most of the investments